effect was hard. I hope it looked impressive. 40 years ago today, a movie was released that took us all on a journey of personal discovery and taught us to expand our horizons. No, that was actually a week later. Obviously, I'm talking about Star Trek, the motion picture. You want to talk about motionlessness, but anyway, in this episode, I'd like to talk about why Star Trek the Motion Picture is such a unique achievement and well worth a second look. Now, how the hell am I supposed to know what you just said? But then, how do I ever? Now, before we talk about the movie itself, I hope you'll indulge me a bit as I talk about my own personal relationship with the Star Trek franchise. Now, I loved the original series as a kid and started watching reruns when I was as young as 4 years old.
I can even remember reenacting Kirk's famous battle with the Gorn using my Mego Captain Kirk and a Godzilla figure wrapped in a dish towel. Anyway, when the first Star Trek movie came out, I was too young to go see it. But I did have this sweet little Star Trek the Motion Picture tank top.
Believe it or not, it's actually too big for you. I hope not.
Anyway, I didn't see the first movie until years later when we got a VCR, and I didn't quite know what to make of it. The colorful adventure of the original series or the visceral thrills of the Wrath of Khan were nowhere to be found. Instead, we get this long, deliberately paced examination of the nature of consciousness and personhood. I didn't hate it, but suffice to say, I thought the movies that followed it were much better.
But that was then. Today, the movie is one of my favorites, right up there with The Wrath of Khan as far as the feature films go. And before I tell you why, let's run through a brief history of how Star Trek went from being a canceled television series to one of the largest budgeted movies ever up to that point.
I'll keep this fairly brief, as most of it has been so extensively documented that it's entered the realm of pop culture legend. Star Trek ran for 3 seasons between 1966 and 1969 before being unceremoniously canceled by NBC and sold into syndication. It was in reruns that the show finally found its audience, sort of creating modern fandom in the process. Toys, books, and even an animated series followed, but plans were underway to bring Star Trek back to live action, initially by way of a new television program for the ultimately abandoned Paramount network, titled Star Trek Phase 2. But when science fiction-themed blockbusters like Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind took the American box office by storm, plans shifted to bring Star Trek to the big screen and get a slice of that sweet, sweet space pie. Oh yeah, come to daddy. Come to daddy, space pie.
Okay, so the movie that producer Gene Roddenberry and director Robert Wise delivered wasn't exactly the answer to Star Wars the studio might have been looking for.
Indeed, it's established early on when a trio of Klingon ships is effortlessly wiped out by the mysterious entity headed for Federation space, that this conflict cannot possibly be resolved by any sort of forceful means.
And that's brilliant right off the bat. In fact, the mighty Starship Enterprise only fires her weapons once in this entire film, and it's at a rock.
The refitted Constitution-class Enterprise not only looks much more elegant, but also much more powerful. However, against the massive entity calling itself V'ger that's headed for Earth, it seems downright insignificant.
So right away, the legendary Starship Enterprise is completely out of her depth. And she's not the only one.
Enter Admiral James T. Kirk, desk-bound for the past several years in his position as Chief of Starfleet Operations.
Ugh. Desk-bound. That's gotta suck. I don't know.
Kirk pulls rank and uses the crisis to once again assume command of the Enterprise. But it soon becomes apparent that he's no longer as comfortable as he once was in the captain's chair.
And as I get older, in fact about the same age Kirk is supposed to be in this movie, this is where the film takes on a new resonance to me.
You see, the Kirk of the original series is often mischaracterized as having been rash and reckless. But if you actually watch the show, you'll find that he was neither of those things. What he was, however, was supremely confident and competent. And because of that, he knew when to roll the dice.
But here, Kirk has the appearance of a man adrift, and as this new threat emerges, he tells himself he's the only man for the job. But does he really believe this? Or is it all a desperate attempt to recapture past glories?
Even as Kirk manages to get the band back together by drafting McCoy and having Spock show up on his own volition, things just aren't quite the same.
It would have been so easy to just give the audience what they wanted right off the bat. But instead, the movie approaches the characters with maturity and restraint.
Keep in mind, it had only been 10 years since the original series went off the air, and like the rest of the cast, Shatner doesn't really look all that different. If anything, he looks more trim and fit than he did in the third season of the show. And yet it's hard to picture this Kirk serving up karate chops and flying drop kicks. He's matured in the way he carries himself and approaches problems. Unfortunately, Kirk would fall victim to the old Flanderization effect as the movies went on, having some of his character's more cliched traits played up, even as the actor became less and less suited to play said traits. But here, he seems to be much more in control of his impulses.
You see, much like V'ger having fulfilled its mission to learn all that is learnable, our characters appear to be near the peak of their own personal achievements.
Kirk is a high-ranking Starfleet admiral, Spock is on the cusp of attaining total logic, and McCoy is now king of the disco.
And also, much like V'ger, they seem to lack any strong sense of personal direction.
When you're younger and just starting out, you're not so much a defined personality as you are a collection of goals and challenges. Maybe your focus is on finishing school, finding a good paying job, or saving up enough money to go see that big Gundam statue.
What? Do you know how much a plane ticket to Japan costs?
But if you are fortunate enough to eventually get out in front of some of those goals and problems, you might just find yourself pondering V'ger's question,
is this all that I am? Is there nothing more?
Or to put it another way,
What if this is as good as it gets?
we find our characters past the halfway point of what have all been very successful lives, brought back together to face an adversary that happens to be a computer that has amassed more data than it knows what to do with.
Meanwhile, you have a film production with all the resources in the world at its disposal, and yet the movie itself seems unsure of what to do with those resources. They might have easily decided to use their generous budget to deliver the same sort of whiz-bang thrills that mass audiences had responded to in Star Wars. But instead, we get something more in line with the cerebral Star Trek that Gene Roddenberry envisioned when he produced his original rejected television pilot, made with the budget of a big tentpole blockbuster. And that will never happen again. Look, the sequel, The Wrath of Khan, is great in its own right, full of interesting ideas and compelling character development. In fact, it probably is the superior film overall. But it's also patient zero for Star Trek as a vehicle for action-adventure stories. And the dragon of The Wrath of Khan is one that the franchise continues to chase to this day.
But Star Trek the Motion Picture is pure Roddenberry, unhampered by popular trends or audience expectations. Instead, it's allowed to unfold much as the mysteries of our universe do, at its own pace and to its own conclusions.
Plus, it's worth mentioning that of all the original Star Trek films, this is really the only one to have a truly cinematic look and scope. The money spent was exorbitant for its time, but it's all up there on screen, and it looks fantastic.
You may have noticed that for a movie I'm dedicating an entire video to, beyond the basic setup, I haven't really recapped the plot that much. And the reason for that is that I want anyone who hasn't seen it to check it out for themselves.
Director Robert Wise, who helmed classic movies like The Haunting, The Sound of Music, and The Day the Earth Stood Still, gives the film a relaxed old Hollywood pace that takes you on a journey with the characters. And when it's over, you just might feel that you not only learned something about them, but also yourself.
And that's all I have to say about Star Trek the Motion Picture. If you've never seen it, or maybe just haven't for a while, give it a watch. And hey, while you're at it, you might as well watch The Jerk, too. Not the jerk I was talking about. So anyway, happy 40th anniversary to Star Trek the Motion Picture. There'll probably never be another Star Trek movie quite like it, but really, who knows? Because the human adventure is just beginning.